There's a strange paradox going on right now at the center of AI. On one hand, we're racing towards systems that feel almost superhuman already, models that ace standardized tests, speak dozens of languages, and churn through scientific knowledge faster than any person alive can. And yet, as I've noted many times here, and Eric Schmidt said at a recent summit with Fei-Fei Li and Peter Diamandis, we still need a fundamental algorithmic breakthrough before anything like AGI or ASI becomes real. Not more GPUs, not more data, a true breakthrough in how AI thinks. Something like cross-disciplinary intuition, the kind that let Einstein imagine a man falling off a building and rewrite physics in the form of general relativity. But even if we solve that, there's a second, more important problem. Abundance doesn't automatically turn into prosperity. Wealth can still concentrate into a few companies, a few nations, a few hands. So the real questions are, how do we get the breakthrough we need for abundance? And once we do, how do we turn that into true societal prosperity? Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So today I want to riff on this excellent interview with Peter Diamandis as the host, and he's interviewing Eric Schmidt, ex-CEO of Google, and Fei-Fei Li, famed researcher out of Stanford, who started up her own company to create virtual worlds. And apparently at this conference in the Middle East, she's actually showing it off. How cool would that be? Anyway, I'm going to pull a couple of short segments about how to get to AGI and then how to share the abundance of AGI between all of society. So I want to talk about all of that stuff. I will leave a link to the original video in the description so you can watch the entire thing. I highly recommend it. Only about 25 minutes or so, if I'm recalling correctly. 26 minutes and 32 seconds, so not that much time to invest, and you can listen to it at 1.5 speed easily enough. So we're going to start here about 2 minutes in with Peter asking the question of what is AGI. One thing to note here, I can't believe how rude the audience is in this video. They're just wandering around the entire time. Nobody ever seems to be sitting down and stuff. A very, very strange thing. I don't know if that's a cultural thing or not, but I noticed it as very distracting while I was watching this video. So if you know if this is like a cultural thing and it's okay to wander around in Saudi Arabia while people are talking, let me know in the comments, because it seemed very rude to me, but maybe I'm mistaken about that. Anyway, so Peter's going to ask the question.
And it's one that I don't think anybody has a perfect answer for, but what does superintelligence mean and when is it likely to be here? Eric, we've talked about this. What are your thoughts?
So thank you, Peter, and thanks for everybody for being here, and obviously thanks to Fei-Fei, our very close colleague. The general accepted definitions of general intelligence is its human level of intelligence, AGI. And human intelligence you can understand because we're all human. You have ideas, you have friends, you think about things, you're creative. Superintelligence is defined as the intelligence equal to the sum of everyone, right? Or even better than all humans. And there is a belief in our industry that we will get to superintelligence. We don't know exactly how long. There's a group of people who I call the San Francisco consensus, because they're all living in San Francisco. Maybe it's the weather or the drugs or something. But they all basically think that it's within 3 to 4 years. I personally think it'll be longer than that. But fundamentally, their argument is that there are compounding effects that we're seeing now, which will race us to this much faster than people think.
So with this definition in mind, the really, really critical part becomes how do we get to AGI/artificial superintelligence? It's sort of generally understood that once we reach a true artificial general intelligence that's as smart as the smartest human being in a broad-based sense, if that's at all possible, and that's a big question, once we get to there, the compounding effects will allow artificial superintelligence to happen kind of on its own. It will be a bootstrapping sort of thing where it will happen on its own, and we won't have to have as much input into that. It's really getting to AGI, a true AGI that is the crux of the issue. And once we get there, ASI will just sort of happen because AGI will invent its own successor, ASI. As I'm sure you know, I'm constantly researching AI, Tesla, and technology, and I read a lot, but there's way more great content out there than anyone has time for. That's why I've actually used Shortform for almost 2 years now, and it's become my go-to learning tool. Shortform makes super-powered guides to the best nonfiction books, not just quick summaries, but deep, well-written breakdowns that actually teach you the ideas better than most people get from reading the book once. It's like having your smartest friend explain the key insights, connect them to other books and show you how they all fit together. Take Never Split the Difference. The short form guide doesn't just summarize the negotiation tactics, it ties them to psychology and cognitive biases from thinking fast and slow, then compares them to classics like Getting to Yes. You end up understanding the why behind every strategy. And they've got guides across every topic: business, self-improvement, technology, even psychology and money. Plus, new ones drop every week, and subscribers can even vote on what comes next. And the newest thing I love, Shortform AI, their browser extension. It instantly summarizes any article, blog, or even YouTube video with one click. It's wild, and it saves me so much time staying up to date on AI papers and tech news. If you want to learn faster and smarter like I do, go to shortform.com/drknowitall. You'll get a free trial and 3 months off their annual plan. Again, that's shortform.com/drknowitall. Seriously, if you love learning but don't have hours to read every book on your list, Shortform is a game changer. Check it out. Links in the description and pinned comment. A big thanks to Shortform for sponsoring today's episode, and now let's get back to it. So the really important part here is that Eric Schmidt says, and again, I agree with this, I have been saying this for a while, that there needs to be another fundamental improvement in artificial intelligence in the way that we think about it, the algorithms that we use. Transformers and diffusion are not enough at this point. In other words, we need something else. We need another attention is all you need paper. We need some new algorithmic breakthrough to get to AGI.
So I think that to get to real superintelligence, we probably need another algorithmic breakthrough.
We need another what?
Algorithmic breakthrough.
Okay.
Another way of dealing with this. The technical term is called non-stationarity of objectives.
So that is the crux of the first part of this argument. In other words, how do we get to AGI? We need something that will take us from a stationary objective function. In other words, one thing that's just sort of preordained. You put it into the training loop and the AI trains on that and you get an output. We need to change that to something that's non-stationary, as Eric Schmidt calls it. And Fei-Fei Li definitely agrees with this. You hear her throughout this interview saying over and over again what AI cannot yet do, right? There's a lot of stuff that AI can do. It's amazing what it can do, but it's weirdly kind of siloed. It can do this amazing thing like look over, 300 papers in a few minutes and come up with some really interesting insights into what those papers have in common, their differences, things like that. But it can't make that intuitive leap between some of these papers and others in different disciplines and say, oh, what if we apply this to this? AI right now interpolates, it doesn't extrapolate. In other words, it can take a collection of data and it can make all sorts of connections inside of that, but what it can't do is jump from one silo to another. And that's that fundamental algorithmic breakthrough, that ability that like Einstein does, where he thought the happiest thought of his life, weirdly enough, is a guy falling out of a building. But it was the thing that gave him this idea that the ground is actually rushing up towards you, that space-time is actually accelerating in the world that we live in with gravity. And it's not that the person is falling, it's that the world is actually accelerating up towards him. Yeah, that's mind-bending. It's crazy stuff to think about, but that's the kind of insight that he had. That's not within the data that existed in the early 1900s. That's something he created out of whole cloth using, a kind of a pictorial intuition. Einstein was very, very pictorial. He thought about special relativity the same way. He thought about the quantum nature of photons and things like that the same way. Very fascinating how his mind worked, but it was very, very pictorial. This is something that you don't see an AI capable of doing at this point, which means it can never be as smart as the smartest human, certainly not in the sort of across the board sort of way. It's got these incredible silos that it's able to deal with, but it's not able to jump across those silos. And so while AI is super intelligent in some ways right now, it's way less than intelligent in others. And Fei-Fei Li talks about this in a quick clip here.
Part of today's AI is already better than any human. For example, AI's ability of speaking many different languages, translating between, dozens and dozens of languages. Pretty much no human can do that. Or AI's ability to calculate things really fast. AI's ability to know from chemistry to biology to sports, the vast amount of knowledge. So it's already super to human in many ways. But it remains a question that can AI ever be Newton? Can AI ever be Einstein?
So that's the real question, isn't it? That's the problem, and she's expressing it here. The true geniuses of humanity, the people in the arts and sciences and mathematics and things like that who are able to make these leaps, AI cannot do this right now. So even though something like GPT-5 has an IQ of around 140, which is clearly on the genius level of things, and it will only get smarter in the future, that measurement is not very accurate for an artificial intelligence. It's an interpolative measurement. It means it has a high recall, high fluency, and it does have some really amazing abilities to look at images and things like that, and figure out how to manipulate those images in three-dimensional space and things like that, right? Taking 2D images, manipulating them in 3D space. So it's really amazing at that stuff, but it is unable to do that extrapolative. It's unable, as the best of us humans at our best moments, we're able to be intuitive. What we call intuitive is that extrapolative thinking, the ability to think outside of the box. And Feifei specifically says once you get to an IQ of 148 or so, which is weirdly enough around what mine is, at least when I was tested way back in high school, it was a long time ago, but IQ sort of loses meaning at that point. It doesn't have so much meaning anymore, especially for an AI. And she says very specifically, IQ measures interpolation, right? And genius requires conceptual leaps, which is what I'm saying as extrapolation, the ability to think outside the box instead. And so they continue on. Eric Schmidt says it doesn't matter how many GPUs you throw at it. Scaling alone, he says, won't get us creativity or paradigm shifts. The problem right now, according to Eric Schmidt, and this is interesting in my mind because I hadn't thought about it this way, but the objective function, the loss function that these AIs are being trained for is stationary. It's a static function. It's just a thing. You say, this is what you're looking for, whether it's to please a human or to be able to reduce errors in programming or in mathematics or something like that. It's just a stationary thing, and you can only train against that, whereas humans are constantly manipulating our objective function. It might be like, I'm hungry right now, which I honestly am. I'm like, as soon as I finish filming this, I'm going to go make dinner because I'm hungry. So that's kind of my objective function. I have a multitude of objective functions right at the moment. I have one that's very physical and a need, and I have another that's very cerebral, which is talking to you about this video. And if I had a moment of intuition, if I had this thinking outside the box moment, maybe I would realize that hunger and, these things would connect together in some way. I'm not having that moment right now. In fact, I usually do at the gym. I have my shower moments at the gym, which is where I thought of this video this morning. So those intuitive sort of leaps as you think about these different things, they happen because we're able to hold multiple objective functions in our souls, our brains, whatever you want to call it. We're able to hold those simultaneously and to jump between them. And that's something that today's AI simply cannot do. And that leads to this wonderful quote from Feifei Li.
We have all the celestial data of the movement of the stars that we observe today. Give that data to any AI algorithm. It will not be able to deduce Newtonian law of motion.
So isn't that really amazing? If you gave it all of the knowledge up to when Newton lived, you could give it all of that knowledge. We have all of that knowledge, right? We've got it digitized. We can just feed it right in. These AIs will not be able to deduce Newtonian laws of motion. They won't be able to figure this out because they just can't jump out of the paradigm that they're in and into a new one. So AI fails here because it lacks self-generated hypotheses. It lacks internal causal structure building. It can't revise its own objectives mid-thought. That's a big one. And so while scaling gives us more speed and more accuracy and more IQ points and stuff, it will not lead to paradigm shifts. And that's crucially important. And of course, we've got stories about this cross-disciplinary intuition. Like I already talked about, Einstein imagining a person falling off of a building. That thought experiment, that very, very visual way of thinking about it is a famous story that people know about. Also, Newton dreaming under an apple tree is another famous story, right? He's dreaming under the apple tree, probably apocryphal, but he's sitting there wondering about gravity and an apple hits him on the head and he has this idea of what gravity is. And then, of course, there's the famous Feynman playing with spinning plates because he spun plates because I don't know. He was just that kind of guy. And he derived equations from the intuition of these spinning plates. So it's humans doing one thing, right? He was probably making dinner, spinning plates and things. And then he thought about Feynman equations and about deriving these equations from the intuition, the crosstalk between these different ideas. That's not interpolation. It's analogical fusion and reframing. In other words, extrapolation, or what we would call intuition. So current AI cannot generate new, meaningful problems. It can't recast a domain using unrelated metaphors. It can't abandon the assumed structure of the problem it was trained on, and therefore it's unable to do what the best of humans are able to do. Therefore, as Eric Schmidt and I both argue, there has to be another breakthrough, and that breakthrough must at least allow internally shifting objectives, things that allow you to move between objectives, the fluid connection of disparate domains, and generating new classes of insights from the data that you have. A really interesting way of thinking about this is that genius is anti-paradigmatic. The way most of us think and act most of the time is based on paradigms. We just grow up, we have all of this information, and we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. That's a paradigm. It could be in science, it could be in daily life. But true genius, world-changing genius, is de facto anti-paradigmatic because it has to move away from that paradigm. And AI today is hyper-paradigmatic. It is super good at doing the paradigm. It is super bad at breaking out of that paradigm. So Peter then asks about if this challenge is overcome, what happens next? In other words, if we get to AGI and then to ASI, what happens next? And I would call this the second half of the video, even though it's a bit longer. That's where we get to the question of how do we get to abundance and how do we get from abundance to prosperity? And I'll explain the difference between those two, and it's very, very important.
So are we entering post-scarcity? I don't know. I'm not as bullish as a typical Silicon Valley person, because I think I absolutely believe AI will be augmenting human capabilities in incredibly profound ways. But I think we will continue to see that the collaboration between humans and AI will be the most productive and fruitful way of doing things.
And so Feifei Li talks about this. She says she's not as bullish about being able to get to AGI and ASI very quickly, but that she believes that it will arrive eventually, but that the path is human and AI together, that blending is necessary. And that's actually a very, very positive point in my mind, because I'm afraid that we could get left behind. I hope that it does become a future where we're blended together. But the problem that arrives, no matter how it gets there, is if we get to AGI, the problem is that I, and of course Eric Schmidt as well, sees a very, very high tendency towards a concentration of benefits into a small group of companies and or nations rather than to society at large.
What's that implication, Eric, for the global economy? How are we going to see redistribution, if you would, of wealth or of capabilities? Are we going to see a leveling of the field between nation states, or are we going to see runaway winners?
So in your abundance hypothesis, which we've talked a lot about, there may be a flaw in the argument, because part of the abundance argument is that it's abundance for everyone. But there's plenty of evidence that these technologies have network effects which concentrates to a small number of winners. So you could, for example, imagine a small number of countries getting all those benefits. In those countries, you could imagine a small number of firms and people getting those benefits. Those are a public policy question. There's no question the wealth will be created, because the wealth comes from efficiency. And every company that has implemented AI has seen huge gains.
So now we move away from individuals and into the more corporate world. And by corporate, I mean human beings together, not necessarily a corporation, but the collection of us. The problem, as Eric said, is there could be easily network effects. I recently saw Good Fortune, which I think is a movie that deserves a little bit more attention than it got. A really fun movie with Seth Rogen and Keanu Reeves. And anyway, it's kind of like It's a Wonderful Life meets Trading Places. But the idea, Seth Rogen is a very rich guy, and he goes into meetings and pitches ideas, and people think he's amazing. And when they switch places, of course, and he's poor, he goes into those same meetings and he gets kicked out because, of course, people don't know him then, and he has none of those network effects. So that idea of network effects is really important. Like, once you have a small group of people or a small group of companies or even a small group of AIs, once you have that small group, you get that network effect, and it starts to cycle around itself. And therefore the money, everything starts to concentrate on those groups of people. And of course, nations as well that are the owners of that group of people, right? In the United States, you could say, OpenAI OpenAI and Tesla, etc., are owned by the United States. They're part of the United States. But anyway, that network effect is concentrative. It takes all of that wealth and it pushes it into a smaller and smaller group. The problem is that you then need to figure out some sort of economic, geopolitical way of spreading that out. And that is not something that humans do by nature. We always imagine ourselves in a zero-sum game, which is, again, it's evolutionary. It's the kind of thing whereas if you get more stuff, I have less stuff, which is not necessarily very true anymore, but certainly biologically, evolutionarily, we feel that way. If somebody else gets a new car or a fancy new house, you feel very, very jealous of that. And you're like, I want that as well. And of course, if you're the person who just got the house, you're like, I deserve this. Nobody should have this. This is mine. And that idea of zero sum, I have to own this thing because there's not enough stuff to go around, is very, very important to human nature, which is going to make it very, very difficult to get to that whole idea of universal basic income and abundance for all, which is what I'm calling prosperity. So let's jump to another quick clip from Fei-Fei Li, and then I will talk about abundance versus prosperity.
I do think AI democratizes. That I totally agree with you. I think whether it's healthcare or transportation or knowledge, AI will democratize massively. But I agree with Eric that this increased global productivity does not necessarily translate to shared prosperity. Shared prosperity is a deeper social problem. It involves policy, it involves, geopolitics, it involves distribution, and that's a different problem from the capability of the technology.
So abundance is just having a lot of something. Let's just talk about money in this case, that of course is a proxy for things like food and power and nice houses and stuff like that. But we can just talk about wealth. Abundance is having lots and lots of wealth. Abundance is separated from prosperity because abundance can be concentrated in a very, very few individuals. If you take couple thousand billionaires in the world right now, they all have an immense amount of abundance, right? They have everything they want. That is not the same thing as prosperity, because prosperity is more of a broad-based thing. How does the rising tide lift all boats? That is prosperity. And prosperity is much more political and economic and cultural, not technological. And that's the big crux of this second problem. So assuming that these AI companies are not wasting everyone's money, if they are, then whatever happens, happens. We get a bubble and things collapse. But if they actually get to AGI and then ASI, there will be incredible abundance for these companies and to some extent for the countries that, are around these companies. But that does not translate into prosperity for all. In fact, just the opposite could easily happen, where it just focuses down on a very, very small group of people. And you get the late 1800s Gilded Age robber baron railroad tycoon types of people, but writ even bigger than the Rockefellers and so forth. You get people and companies that are worth immense amounts of money, and then everybody else has nothing because they've taken it away, because there's no labor required anymore. So that is a significant problem. And of course, our evolutionary psychology that's based on this zero-sum idea encourages hoarding behavior. It encourages anyone with abundance to hold onto it rather than share it. And that is a human nature problem that needs to be overcome. So here I'm going to make a little bit of a cross-silo connection here. May or may not work, but I'm going to say that there's a parallel. AI lacks cross-disciplinary intuition. It's unable to move between the silos, while humans lack cross-disciplinary empathy. We are unable to empathize, especially with people outside of our tribe. The family, the group of people around us, the group of people who are, quote, like us, yeah, we're more easily able to empathize with them. But for someone who looks different or acts different or things like that, there's a significant lack of cross-disciplinary empathy, and that is a significant problem. And so even if we get intuitive AI, if we are able to overcome that first part, humans will likely treat AGI, ASI as a zero-sum resource. And so once one corporation or nation achieves that, there will be an immense incentive to keep it proprietary. There'll be a fear of competitors and a fear of losing one's advantage. So to put it in a nutshell, abundance is the technology. The technology of AI will lead to abundance if it works, while prosperity is policy, and human nature is human nature. It hasn't really evolved over the millennia. So we're going to have to counteract human nature. We're going to have a human nature paradigm shift to get from abundance to prosperity. So let's think about this. How do we get from abundance to prosperity? In order to do that, we need a breakthrough in AI's algorithmic architecture first, right? Because we have to get to abundance, then we need a breakthrough in how humans manage scarcity, power, and distribution. The two breakthroughs are actually linked. AI needs cross-domain intuition, while humanity needs cross-domain empathy. And without both of these things, we're going to get superhuman tools and subhuman decision-making, and potentially a very dystopic future. So AGI requires solving creativity, not just computation, and shared prosperity, not just abundance, requires solving power dynamics and the biological imperative of human beings. Neither of these breakthroughs by any means is guaranteed, but both are necessary if AI is to uplift the species rather than stratify it and crush humanity. And a quick aside here, I've actually done videos with Adam Dorr before from Rethink X, and I'll leave a link to those at the end of this video, but Adam thinks very firmly along these lines as well, and hopefully I'll be able to talk to him again soon. But I want to leave us with a closing thought from Fei-Fei Li.
Our world, unless we are going to wipe out the species, which we're not, has to be human-centered. Whether it's automation or collaboration, it needs to put human agency and dignity and human well-being in the center of all this, whether it's technology, business, product, policy, or any of that.
And I think what Fei-Fei says here is the optimistic way of thinking about this. Humans plus AI teaming together is the most productive path forward. At least I really, really hope for that. And if we get there, and if we can paradigm shift ourselves, we can get democratized intelligence that can lift billions of people into a world that even today we can't imagine. And of course, in order to do this, we need to avoid repeating historical patterns where technology accelerates inequality. If we get the right breakthrough, we enter a world of abundance. If we get the right policies, we transform abundance into prosperity. The challenge is going to be to do both before the gap gets too wide. Alrighty, folks, that's what I've got for you today. That's a lot of stuff to think about, I know. Let me know in the comments what you think about all of this. While you're down there, if you don't mind liking the video, it helps out with YouTube's algorithm. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. And finally, a big thanks once again to Shortform for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to check out my link in the description to get a free trial and 3 months off your annual plan, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.